Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 16 of our reading of The Princess Bride. It is a book by William Goldman. And as always, we're going to go over the copyright information, which clearly says the book is copyright 1973 by William Goldman. All rights reserved, published in the United States by Ballantine Books, a division of Random House Incorporated, New York, and simultaneously in Canada by Ballantine Books of Canada, Limited, Toronto, Canada. There's the Library of Congress catalog number, the ISBN, Harcourt, manufactured in the United States of America. This is the fourth printing, and the cover art is by Norman Green. Now, in the last part of the book, Wesley was captured and put into the Zoo of Death, the fifth level, where there's nobody else there. It's for the most deadly things go. And so, yeah. And we're going to find out what happened to Inigo and Physique, because Vizzini is dead. So, anyways, let's continue this. Okay, they were going to go to the thieves' quarters. So the thieves' quarters was clearly the place to go, only Inigo hated it there. Everyone was so dangerous, big, mean, and muscular, and so what if he was the greatest fencer in the world? Who'd know it to look at him? He looked like a skinny Spanish guy. It might be fun to rob. Oh. You couldn't walk around with a sign saying, "Be careful, this is the greatest fencer since the death of the wizard of Corsica. Do not burgle." Beside that, here Inigo felt deep pain. He wasn't that great of a fencer, not anymore. He couldn't be. Hadn't he just been beaten? Once true, he had been a titan, but now? What happens here that you aren't going to read is the 6-page soliloquy from Inigo, in which Morgenstern, through Inigo, reflects on the anguish of fleeting glory. The reason for the soliloquy here is that Morgenstern's previous book had gotten bombed by the critics and also hadn't sold beans. Aside, did you know that Robert Browning's first book of poems didn't sell one copy? True. Even his mother didn't buy it at her local bookstore. Have you ever heard anything more humiliating? How would you like to have been Browning, and it's your first book, and you have these secret hopes, and now you'll be somebody established, important, and you give it a week before you ask the publisher how things are going because you don't want to seem pushy or anything. And then maybe you drop by, and it was probably all very English and understated in those days, and you're Browning, and you chit-chat around a bit before you drop the biggie. Oh, and by the way, any notions yet on how my poems might be doing? And then the editor, who has been dreading this moment, probably says, well, you know how it is with poetry these days. Nothing's taken off like it used to. Requires a bit of time for the word to get around. And then finally somebody had to say it. None, Bob. Sorry, Bob. No, we haven't yet had one authenticated sale. We thought for a bit that Hatchard's had a potential buyer down by Piccadilly, but it didn't quite work out. Sorry, Bob. Of course, we'll keep you posted in the event of a breakthrough. End of aside. Anyways, Inigo finishes his speech on the cliffs and spends the next few hours finding a fisherman who sails him back to Florin City. The thieves' quarters was worse than he remembered. Always before, Physique had been with him, and they made rhymes, and Physique was enough to keep any thief away. Inigo moved panicked up the dark streets, desperately afraid. Why this giant fear? What was he afraid of? He sat on a filthy stoop and pondered. Around him there were cries in the night, and from the alehouses, vulgar laughter. He was afraid. He realized then, because as he sat there, gripping the six-fingered sword for confidence, he was suddenly back to what he had been before Vizzini had found him. A failure. A man without point. No, with no attachment, no tomorrow. Inigo had not touched brandy in years. Now he felt his fingers trembling for fumbling for money. Now he heard his footsteps running towards the nearby alehouse. Now he saw his money on the counter. Now he felt the brandy bottle in his hand. Back to the stoop he ran. He opened the bottle. He smelled the rough brandy. He took a sip. He coughed. He took a swallow. He coughed again. He gulped it down and coughed and gulped some more and half began to smile. His fears were starting to leave him. After all, why should he have ever been why should he have even been afraid? He was Inigo Montoya. The bottle was half gone now, son of the great Domingo Montoya. So what was there in the world worth fearing? Now all the brandy was gone. How dare fear approach a wizard such as Inigo Montoya? Well, never again. Into the second bottle. Never, 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 never again. He sat alone and confident and strong. His life was straight and fine. He had money enough for brandy, and if you had that, you had the world. The stoop was wretched and bleak. Inigo slumped there, quite contented, clutching the bottle in his once trembling hand. Existence was really very simple when you did what you were told, and nothing could be simpler or better than what he had in store. All he had to do was wait and drink until Vizzini came. Physique had no idea how long he was unconscious. He only knew, as he staggered to his feet on the mountain path, that his throat was very sore, for the man in black had strangled him. What to do? The plans had all gone wrong. Physique closed his eyes, trying to think. There was a proper place to go when plans went wrong, but he couldn't quite remember it. Inigo had even made a rhyme up for him so he wouldn't forget, and now even with that he was so stupid he had forgotten. Was that it? Was it stupid, stupid, go and wait for Vizzini with Cupid? That rhymed, but where was Cupid? Where was the Cupid? Dummy, dummy, go out now and fill your tummy. That rhymed too, but what kind of instructions were those? What to do, what to do. Dunce, dunce, use your brain and do it right for once. No help, nothing was any help. He never had done anything right, not in his whole life, until Vizzini came, and without another thought, Physique ran off into the night after the Sicilian. Vizzini was napping when he got there. He had been drinking wine and dozed off. Physique dropped to his knees and put his hands in prayer position. Vizzini, I'm sorry, he began. Vizzini napped on. Physique shook him gently. Vizzini did not wake. Not so gently this time. Nothing. Oh, I see, you're dead, Physique said. He stood up. He's dead, Vizzini is, he said softly, and then with not a bit of help from his brain, a great scream of panic burst from his throat into the night. Inigo! And he whirled back down the mountain path because if Inigo was alive, it would be all right. It wouldn't be the same. No, it could never be that without Vizzini to order them and insult them as only he could, but at least there would be time for poetry. And when Physique reached the cliffs of insanity, he said, Inigo, Inigo, here I am, to the rocks, and I'm here, Inigo, it's your Physique. To the tree, and Inigo, Inigo, answer me, please, all over until there was no other conclusion to draw, but that just as there was now no Vizzini, so there was also no Inigo, and that was hard. It was, in point of fact, too hard for Physique, so he began to run, crying out, be with you in a minute, Inigo, and right behind you, Inigo, and hey, Inigo, wait up, straight up, which was the way he ran, and without that, wait up, straight up, which was the way he ran, and wouldn't there be fun with rhymes once he and Inigo were together again. But after an hour or so of shouting, his throat gave out because he had, after all, been strangled, almost to death, in the very recent past. On he ran, and on until finally he reached a tiny village and found just outside town some nice rocks that formed a kind of cave, almost big enough for him to stretch out in. He sat with his back against the rock and his hand around his knees and his throat hurting until the village boys found him. They held their breath and crept very close as they dared. Physique hoped they would go away, so he froze, pretending to be off with Inigo, and Inigo would say barrel, and Physique might a right quick would come back with Carol, and maybe there would be sing a little something until Inigo said serenade, and you couldn't stump Physique with one that easily because of centigrade. And then Inigo would make a word about the weather, and Physique would rhyme it, and that was how it went until the village boys stopped being afraid of him. Physique could tell that because they were creeping very close to him now, and all of a sudden yelling their lungs out and making crazy faces. He didn't really blame them. He looked like the kind of person you did that to, mocked. His clothes were torn, and his throat was gone, and his eyes were wild, and he probably would have yelled too if he'd been their age. It was only when they found him funny that he found it, though he did not know the word degrading. No more yelling, just laughter now. Laughter, Physique thought, and then he thought giraffer, because that's all he was to them, some huge funny thing that couldn't make much noise. Laughter, giraffer, from here to hereafter. Physique huddled up in his cave and tried looking on the bright side. At least they weren't throwing things at him, not yet anyways. Wesley awoke chained in a giant cage. His shoulder was beginning to fester from the gnawing and digging that the rouses, rodents of unusual size, had done into his flesh. He ignored his discomfort momentarily and tried to adjust to his surroundings. He was certainly underground. It was not the lack of windows that made that sure, more the darkness. From somewhere above him now he could hear animal sounds, an occasional lion roar, the yelp of a cheetah. Cheetahs actually chirp, they don't yelp. Shortly after his return to consciousness, the albino appeared, bloodless, with skin as pale as dying birch. The candlelight that served to illuminate the cage made the albino seem totally like a creature who had never seen the sun. The albino held a tray which carried many things, bandages and food, healing powders and brandy. Where are we? From Wesley. A shrug from the albino. Who are you? Shrug. There was almost an entire was almost the entire extent of this fellow's conversation. Wesley asked question after question while the albino tended and redressed his wound, then fed him food that was warm and surprisingly good and plentiful. Shrug, shrug. Who knows I'm here? Shrug. Lie, but tell me something. Give an answer. Who knows I'm here? Whispers. I know they know. They? Shrug. The prince and the count, you mean? Nod. And that is all? Nod. When I was brought in here, I was half conscious. The count was giving the orders, but 3 soldiers were carrying me. They know too. Shake. Whispered. Knew. They're dead. That's what you're saying? Shrug. Am I to die then? Shrug. Wesley lay back on the floor of the giant underground cage, watching as the albino silently reloaded the tray, glided from sight. If the soldiers were dead, surely it was not unreasonable to assume that he would eventually follow, but if they wanted his erasure, surely it was also not unreasonable to assume that they had not the least intention of doing it immediately. Else why tend his wounds? Why return his strength with good warm food? No, his death would be a while yet, but in the meantime, considering the personalities of his captors, it was finally not unreasonable to assume that they would do their best to make him suffer greatly. Wesley closed his eyes. There was pain coming in, coming, and he had to be ready for it. He had to prepare his brain, so he had to get his mind controlled and safe from their efforts, so that they could not break him. He would not let them break him. He would hold together against anything and all. If only they gave him sufficient time to make ready. He knew he could defeat pain. It turned out that they gave him sufficient time. It was months before the machine was ready. But they broke him anyway. At the end of the 13th day of festivities, with 60 days more of partying to enjoy, Buttercup was genuinely concerned that she might lack the strength to endure. Smile, smile, hold hands now, and thank you, and thank you. Oh, bow and thank, over and over. She was simply exhausted from 1 month. How was she to survive twice that? It turned out, because of the king's health, to be both easy and sad. For with 55 days to go, Lotheron began to weaken terribly. Prince Humperdinck ordered new doctors brought in. There was still the last miracle man alive, Max, but since they had fired him long before, bringing him back on the case now was simply not deemed wise. If he was incompetent then, when Lotheron was only desperately ill, how could he suddenly be a cure-all now with Lotheron dying? The new doctors all agreed on various tried and true medications, and within 48 hours of their coming on the case, the king was dead. The wedding date, of course, was unchanged. It wasn't every day a country had a 500th anniversary, but all the festivities were either curtailed entirely or vastly cut down, and Prince Humperdinck became 45 days before the wedding, King of Florin. And that changed everything, because before he had taken nothing but his hunting seriously, and now he had to learn everything, learn to run a country. And he buried himself in books and wise men, and how did you tax this, and when should you tax that, and foreign entanglements, and who could be trusted, and how far, and with what. And before his eyes, Humperdinck changed from a man of fear and action to one of frenzied wisdom, because he had to get it all straight now before any other country dared interfere with the future of Florin. So the wedding, when it actually took place, was a tiny thing and brief, sandwiched in between a minister's meeting and a treasury crisis, and Buttercup spent her first afternoon as queen, wandering around the castle not knowing what in the world to do with herself. It wasn't until King Humperdinck walked out onto the balcony with her to greet the gigantic throng that had spent the day in patience waiting that she realized it had happened. She was the queen. Her life, for whatever it was worth, belonged now to the people. They stood together on the castle balcony, accepting the cheers and cries and endless thunderous hip hips, until Buttercup said, "Please, may I walk once more among them?" And the king said with a nod that she might, and down she went again, as on the day of the wedding announcement, radiant and alone, and again the people swept apart to let her pass, weeping and cheering and bowing, and then one person booed. On the balcony, watching it all, Humperdinck reacted instantly, gesturing soldiers into the area where the sound had come from, dispatching more troops quickly down to surround the queen, and like clockwork, Buttercup was safe. The booer apprehended and led away. "Hold a moment," Buttercup said, still shaken by the unexpectedness of what had happened. The soldier held the booer stopped. Bring her to me," Buttercup said, and in a moment the booer was right there, eye to eye. It was an ancient woman, withered and bent, and Buttercup thought of all the faces that had gone by in her lifetime, but this one she could not remember. "Have we met?" the queen asked. The old one shook her head. "Then why on this day, why do you insult the queen?" "Because you are not worthy of cheers," the old woman said, and suddenly she was yelling. "You had love in your hands, and you gave it up for gold." She turned to the crowd. "It is true what I tell you. There was love alongside her in the fire swamp, and she dropped it from her fingers like garbage, and that is what she is, the queen of garbage. I have given my word to the prince, Buttercup began, but the old woman would not be quieted. Ask her how she got through the fire swamp. Ask her if she did it alone. She threw love away to be the queen of grime, the queen of muck. I am old and life means nothing to me, so I am the only person in all this crowd to dare to tell truth. And truth tells how to the queen of uh, feculence, if you want to, but not I. Cheer the queen of slime and ordure, if you want to, but not I. Rave over the beauty of the queen of cesspools, but not I, not I. She was advancing on Buttercup now. Take her away, Buttercup ordered, but the soldiers could not stop her, and the old woman kept coming on, her voice growing louder and louder and louder and louder and louder and louder, and Buttercup woke up screaming. She was in her bed alone, safe. The wedding was still 60 days away. But her nightmare had begun. The next night she dreamed of giving birth to their first child, and interruption. And hey, how about giving old Morgenstern credit for a major league fake out there? I mean, didn't you think for a while at least that they really were married? I did. It's one of the biggest memories of my father reading. I had pneumonia, remember? But I was a little better now and madly caught up in the book. And the one thing you know when you're 10 is that no matter what, there's going to be a happy ending. They can sweat all they want to scare you, the authors, but back of it all, you know, you first, oh, you just have no doubt that in the long run, justice is going to win out. And Wesley and Buttercup, well, they had their troubles, sure, but they were going to get married and live happily ever after. I would have bet the family fortune if I'd found a sucker big enough to take me on. Well, when my father got through with that sentence, where the wedding was sandwiched in between the minister's meeting, and the treasury, whatever I said, you read that wrong. My father's this little bald barber, remember that too, and kind of illiterate. Well, you just don't challenge a guy who has trouble reading and say that he's read something incorrectly, because that's really threatening. I'm doing the reading, he said. I know that, but you got it wrong. She didn't marry that rotten Humperdinck. She marries Wesley. It says right here, my father began, a little huffy, and he starts going over it again. You must have skipped a page then. Something's something. Get it right, huh? By now, he was more than a tiny bit upset. I skipped nothing. I read the words. The words are here. I read them. Good night, and off he went. Hey, please no, I called after him, but he's stubborn. And the next thing my mother was in saying, your father says his throat is too sore. I told him not to read so much, and she tucked and fluffed me, and no matter how I battled, it was over. No more story till the next day. I spent the whole night thinking Buttercup married Humperdinck. It just rocked me. How could I explain it? But the world didn't work that way. Good got attached to good. Evil you flushed down the John. And that was that. But their marriage, I couldn't make it jibe. God, goodness, did I work at it. First I thought that probably Buttercup had this fantastic effect on Humperdinck and turned him into a kind of Wesley, or maybe Wesley and Humperdinck turned out to be long-lost brothers, and Humperdinck was so happy to get his brother back, he said, look, Wesley, I didn't realize that you were who you were when I married her, so what I'll do is I'll divorce her and you marry her, and that way we'll all be happy. To this day, I don't think I was ever more creative. But I didn't take something, but it didn't take. Something was wrong, and I couldn't lose it. Something that was this discontent gnawing away until it had a place big enough to settle in, and then it curled up and stayed there, and it's still inside me, lurking as I write this now. The next night, when my father went back to reading and the marriage turned out to have been Buttercup's dream, I screamed. I knew it. All along, I knew it. And my father said, "So you're happy now? It's all right now. We can please continue." And I said, "Go." And he said, and he did. But I wasn't happy. Oh, my ears were happy, I guess. My story sense was happy, my heart too, but in my, I suppose you have to call it soul, there was that darn discontent shaking its dark head. All this was never explained to me till I was in my teens, and there was this great woman who lived in my home town, Edith Neisef, dead now, and she wrote terrific books about how we screw up our children. Brothers and Sisters was one of her books. The Eldest Child was another, published by Harper. Edith didn't need the plug, seeing, like I said, as she's no longer with us. But if there are any amongst you who are worried that maybe you're not being perfect parents, pick up one of Edith's books while there's still time. I knew her 'cause her kid Ed got his haircuts from my pop, and she was this writer, and by my teens I knew secretly that was the life for me too, except I wouldn't tell anybody. It was too embarrassing. Barber's son, if they hustled, maybe got to be IBM salesmen, but writers? No way. Don't ask me how, but eventually Edith discovered my ambition, and from then on sometimes we would talk, and I remember once we were having iced tea on the nicer porch and talking, and just outside the porch was their badminton court, and I was watching some kids play badminton, and Ed had just shellacked me, and as I left the court for the porch, he said, "Don't worry, it'll all work out. You'll get me next time." And I nodded, and then Ed said, "And if you don't, you'll beat me at something else." I went to the porch and sipped iced tea, and Edith was reading this book, and she didn't put it down when she said, "That's not necessarily true, you know." I said, "How do you mean?" And that's when she put her book down and looked at me and said it. "Life isn't fair, Bill. We tell our children that it is, but it's a terrible thing to do. It's not only a lie, it's a cruel lie. Life is not fair, and it never has been, and it's never going to be. Would you believe that for me right then, it was like one of those comic books where the light bulb goes on over Mandrake, the magician's head? It isn't, I said, so loud it really startled her. You're right, it's not fair. I was so happy. If I'd known how to dance, I'd have started dancing. Isn't that great? Isn't that just terrific? I think along about here, Edith must have thought I was well on my way towards being bonkers. But it meant so much to me to have it said and out and free and flying. That was the discontent I endured that night. My father stopped reading. I realized right then that was the reconciliation I was trying to make and couldn't. We went way over. Anyways, we have been reading from The Princess Bride by William Goldman. If you like this content, then make sure you like and subscribe, ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me in any way, all the information will be in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.